If you're a fan of Ryan Murphy's TV anthology smash hit American Horror Story, you're probably familiar with the beloved character Pepper, the so-called pinhead whose girlish charm won the hearts of audiences in both Asylum and Freak Show. But what if I told you Pepper is actually based on a real-life circus performer named schlitzie, whose tragic life has pretty much been lost in time? The untold truth about this American sideshow legend is sure to tug at your heartstrings. So let's turn back the hands of time to the 1900s and get straight into it, shall we? Throughout his life, Schlitzie went by many names. In the circus, he was billed as the Monkey Girl, the Missing Link, and the Last of the Aztecs, while other times he was simply referred to as Pinhead or Freak. The truth is that no one can be sure exactly what Schlitzie's name really was. According to his death certificate, which states that he was born in the Bronx on September 10, 1901, his full name was Schlitzie Surtees. Others have speculated that his birth name was actually Simon Metz, while sources like Joe Nichols' book Secrets of the Sideshows have even suggested that he was born into a well-to-do family in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Though the facts surrounding his birth might be up for debate, one thing's for sure: Schlitzie's childhood was far from ordinary. First and foremost, Schlitzie didn't look much like other kids. His most distinguishing features were his protruding teeth, bushy brows, and his signature elongated head, which tapered upwards into a pin-like point. This unconventional appearance was the result of a condition called microcephaly, which is marked by a deformity of the brain, skull, and body, as well as less than average cognitive abilities. Microcephaly can be caused by genetic abnormalities or by drugs, alcohol, certain viruses, or toxins that are exposed to the fetus during pregnancy. Since nothing certain is known about Schlitzie's parentage, we can't be sure what caused his condition. But it's not hard to imagine that substance abuse might have had something to do with it. This was the 1900s after all. Perhaps because times were so wildly different, and because he's said to have come from an affluent family, there are rumors that Schlitzie's birth parents, whoever they were, took an out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach to their son by locking him away in an attic or basement. That is, until they happened upon a crafty solution. At some point, it seems as if little Schlitzie came to the attention of circus owner George Cortez, who offered his parents money to adopt him into his traveling show. Selling a child with a disability wasn't exactly legal back then, but times were still very different, to put things mildly, and people often looked the other way. His parents may have been glad to get rid of their child, but little did they know, Schlitzie was destined to become a star. Let's take a break for a second. Were you aware of this bizarre chapter of American history? Nowadays, Schlitzie would be treated like a regular guy, not some walking, talking attraction. If you're enjoying this story so far and want to hear more like it, why not let me know by giving this video a like and hitting that subscribe button. Oh, and tap that bell icon too to make sure you don't miss out on the next one. Now let's get back to little old Schlitzie. Besides his unique physical appearance, Schlitzie's condition meant he was also mentally handicapped. Even as an adult, it is said that he had the mental aptitude of a child aged 3 or 4. He could only speak in short, sometimes incomprehensible sentences, and went about life with a childlike naivety that meant he had special caregivers during his time at the circus. In the 19th century and early 20th century, sideshows, an extra secondary production associated with a circus or carnival, were a wildly popular tourist attraction. The most famous kind of sideshow was the 10-in-1, which offered a nightly program of 10 acts performing under one tent for a single admission price. Usually this would comprise of a so-called freak show, which showcased a whole host of extraordinary people like bearded ladies, giants, dwarves, conjoined twins, and much more. Basically, the gist was that regular people would turn up and gawk at anyone deemed different enough to be put on show for their entertainment. It's uncomfortable to think about something like that happening nowadays, but back then, sideshows and circuses were huge money-making machines, and Schlitzie was the proverbial cash cow at the center of many. In fact, during his colorful career, Schlitzie earned a living performing with virtually every major traveling circus of the era, including the Dobrich International Circus, the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, the Tom Mix Circus, and the Clyde Beatty Circus. At the time, people with microcephaly, or pinheads as they were affectionately nicknamed, were billed as being from another planet or ancient race, usually the Aztecs. This folklore meant Schlitzie was admired not only for his appearance and childlike tendencies, but for his apparent heritage as some non-human being. Circuses followed a specific route of cities each year, so the owners would frequently swap out attractions in the hope of bringing in new customers. During his decades at the sideshow, Schlitzie was traded, sold, and lent to various circus owners and was a shining star wherever he went. Some even say he traveled as far as Venezuela. Now you might be thinking to yourself, wasn't Pepper female in American Horror Story? Well, perhaps the strangest aspect of Schlitzie's career is that he was marketed as female in his shows and was usually advertised as the Monkey Girl. As you can see in photos and videos of Schlitzie, he usually dressed in floral muumuu dresses and had his head shaved, leaving behind a girlish ponytail which deliberately emphasized the shape of his head. Some suggest that the dresses were a practical choice because Schlitzie's condition also made him incontinent, so loose-fitting clothes made it easier for his caregivers to change him. However, others recall seeing pants underneath his dresses and say Schlitzie didn't become incontinent until later life, which would ultimately defeat the purpose, so it seems that female performers were possibly just a bigger draw. Because Schlitzie's gender wasn't immediately obvious, it was easy to pull the wool over the audience's eyes. And again, it's equally as likely that Schlitzie just preferred performing in looser clothes, and the circuses just went along with it. One of Schlitzie's most popular acts was really quite simple. He would count from 1 to 10, although he usually skipped the number 7. It's unclear whether he actually had trouble remembering the number or whether he'd simply learned to play the gag for laughs. One thing is for sure, Schlitzie was loved wherever he went. Although he had no real family to speak of, the people he encountered while touring with the circus, from his nurses to his fellow performers, were like close relatives to him. Because of his cognitive difficulties, people often describe Schlitzie as an excitable child, and it was his joyful outlook on life that kept audiences coming back time and time again. According to Jeannie Tomiani, a sideshow half-girl who toured with Schlitzie, whenever audience members showed animosity towards him, laborers at the circus known as roustabouts would step in to stop the abuse of audience members and would even escort them off the premises. Schlitzie may have escaped his tome life to establish himself as one of the top-billed performers on the sideshow circuit, but he was destined for even greater things. Thankfully, sideshows seem like a total thing of the past nowadays. But do any of you guys know someone who might remember what the circuses used to be like? Maybe your great-grandma went on a first date to a sideshow and saw a sword swallower or a bearded lady. And again, I see plenty of those on the bus already. Let me know down in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your stories. During his long and colorful career, Schlitzie also starred in multiple movies. He appeared as a sideshow freak in flicks like The Sideshow in 1928 and Meet Boston Blackie in 1941. And was even cast as one of the Manimals in 1932's The Island of Lost Souls, which was an early adaptation of H.G. Wells' classic novel The Island of Dr. Moreau. But Schlitzie's most notable performance by far was in MGM's 1932 movie Freaks, directed by Browning, where he basically played himself, a sideshow pinhead also named Schlitzie. Except this Schlitzie, like American Horror Story's Pepper, was also a female offstage. The movie is a story of love and betrayal which follows a trapeze artist who joins a group of carnival sideshow performers with a plan to seduce and bump off a dwarf in the troupe to gain his inheritance. The cast featured a whole host of sideshow performers, including other microcephalic people, as well as dwarves, bearded ladies, half-men, and conjoined twins. Upon its release, the film was judged harshly by critics and audiences alike, who deemed it too grotesque and distasteful to be entertaining. One woman even threatened to sue MGM, claiming that the film caused her to suffer a miscarriage. Because it was thought to be exploitative in the way it showcased the real-life freaks in the cast, the movie was later banned in the United Kingdom for over 30 years. And Browning, who was famed at the time for directing Bela Lugosi in 1931's Dracula, struggled to find work afterwards, bringing his career to a premature end. The forgotten film experienced a revival in the 1960s, and nowadays it's viewed as something of a cult classic. Although many scenes were cut and most of the original movie has been erased from history, a few clips of Schlitzie's charming performance still exist online. Schlitzie may have become a minor star in his own right, but his home would always be the circus. And despite his appearances on the big screen, he continued to tour with the sideshows. He'd become so embedded in the colorful carnival world that he didn't belong anywhere else. and as it turned out, his pretend family was about to get a whole lot realer. At some point in 1936, Schlitzie met a chimpanzee trainer named George Surtees from the Tom Mix Circus, who was so taken by him that he became his official caretaker. Not long afterwards, Surtees decided to take things a step further by officially adopting Schlitzie, which explains why he's recorded as Schlitzie Surtees on his death certificate. Although the facts of Schlitzie's childhood are fuzzy, there have also been debates about whether he actually had a secret sister. As the story goes, Schlitzie was born a twin, but his sister, another microcephalic person named Athelia, was separated from him at a young age. These accounts suggest that both Schlitzie and his sister were sold to circus owner Pete Cortez, who then decided to keep Athelia to himself while selling Schlitzie to his brother George Cortez. In fact, there was another microcephalic performer named Athelia who was touring at the same time as Schlitzie. She was even a similar age and is said to have appeared alongside Schlitzie, but it's entirely possible that promoters just saw the opportunity to bill the two performers as siblings as a simple advertising tactic. Whether Schlitzie really had a sister or not, it seemed like he finally had a family to call his own, but that was all about to change. George Surtees died in 1965, and the courts determined that Schlitzie would be left in the custody of his daughter because he couldn't take care of himself. Unfortunately, Surtees' daughter was unfamiliar with the world of the circus and decided to have Schlitzie admitted to the psychiatric ward of the Los Angeles County Hospital. After arriving at the mental institution, Schlitzie entered a deep depression. The carnival world had been warm, welcoming, and colorful, but life in the hospital was cold, sterile, and bleak. Although the institution would sometimes let Schlitzie put on little performances for the staff and other patients, he lost his spark over the next 3 years, and doctors estimated that he wouldn't make it another 6 months. But little did he know his luck was about to change. By pure chance, a sideshow sword swallower named Bill Unks was working as a janitor on the ward during the off-season when he recognized a sad and lonely Schlitzie in the waiting room. Unks informed his friend and colleague Sam Alexander, also known as the Two-Faced Man, and the pair decided to convince the hospital to let them become Schlitzie's primary caregivers. Surprisingly, the hospital allowed Schlitzie back into the circus world, most probably because he would inevitably die in their care if they didn't. After escaping the asylum, Schlitzie performed a few more times with the Dobrich International Circus before retiring to Los Angeles. Even in his retirement, Schlitzie didn't give up his passion for performing. He would entertain people as he fed pigeons and ducks at MacArthur Park and would sell his old sideshow photos to tourists. Schlitzie eventually died on September 24, 1971 at the age of 70, although some say he may have been much older, after living a life full of twists and turns. He'd been unwell for a while and spent some time in hospital before he was transferred to Fountain View Convalescent Home, where he spent his remaining days. His cause of death was listed as bronchial pneumonia brought on by medullary depression, which is a physical condition, not a mental state. He may have been a celebrity in his own right, but when Schlitzie passed away, he had almost no money to his name. He was buried on October 7, 1971 at the Queen of Heaven Cemetery in Rowland Heights, California, in an unmarked grave. Schlitzie's final resting place remained this way for decades until in 2007, lifelong fan and owner of the website findadeath.com, Scott Michaels, decided to hold a fundraiser in his honor. According to the cemetery owner, Schlitzie didn't have enough money to pay for his burial, leaving behind an unpaid balance. After the site's members raised a few $100s, Schlitzie's balance was paid off, and a small ground-level marker was added to the plot to commemorate him properly. Although his upbringing was far from perfect, and his treatment as a living exhibit to be marveled at throughout his life is definitely problematic from a modern-day perspective, it is said that Schlitzie found a sense of belonging at the circus he may never have had anywhere else. And in the annals of sideshow history, there are few performers as famous as Schlitzie. He may have been one of history's more forgotten figures, but he has continued to appear in pop culture in the years since his death. Naomi Grossman, who portrayed Pepper in American Horror Story, watched Freaks religiously and studied all things Schlitzie intensely for her role, stating that she knew she wanted to portray him as a real person with a real condition, rather than a mockery. Despite the many hardships he faced just for being different from everyone else, Schlitzie kept a joyous outlook on life and went on to touch the hearts of millions. What do you make of Schlitzie's story? Were you surprised to learn about the forgotten world of the American sideshows? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you like to take the road less traveled when it comes to learning about history, why not check out this video next? You'll hardly believe the events that unfolded after a little girl spotted her own face on a milk carton at the store. For now, thanks for watching, guys.